And here comes the sun and everything panics because everything happens at once. So it is very early in the morning, but sunrise is nearing. I've been up since 4:40 a.m. or something like that, but it is luckily a place which is very close to where I've grown up. It's about 5-10 minutes of drive. So that is how I actually feel about these heath areas and woodland photography. This kind of photography here is that I like to photograph my local environment, my environment close to home, because I relate much more to it. And this place and this morning is just absolutely gobsmackingly beautiful. Just look around here. I'm in an area where the heather is blooming beautifully. I have plenty of trees and landscape to play around with. And right now I have found my first little scene. So camera, and then I have a couple of, well, it's not really mounts, but collections of heather. And then I have a tree here, and I actually have the moon. I'm trying to incorporate in the scene out here. But the problem is that the fog is actually washing it out a little bit. It was a bit stronger before, but right now it's so far down that the fog is basically just washing it out. You can't really see it. I'm also going in at a low angle, so you can see here with the camera here. I reduce the mid-ground part of this photo as to include a bit more heather. I'm using my 16 to 35 millimeter, Aperture priority, ISO 100, f16, and right now that gives me a shutter speed of 10 seconds. Because it's not sunrise yet, we're still in blue hour, but sunrise will come soon. And yeah, easy peasy settings, trying to include the heather there in the foreground, and then the lone tree in the background as my subject. And then I have a little bit of more interest in the sky with the moon, which, well, you can't really see it right now. And then a little bit of background trees that is lost in the mist. So yeah, beautiful, beautiful. So I've just moved a few meters and found a composition which is a little bit different. So I have a bigger batch of heather here that will hopefully lead into this tree. And then I have some trees here in the background that I'm also including. Let's see if you can see it here, something like this. And as you can see, my settings are exactly as they were before. ISO 100, f16, and it gives me a shutter speed at this moment at 3.2 seconds. There is next to nearly no wind. There's a little bit of wind that sometimes make the grass vibrate a little bit. So the long shutter speed, I just have to think about when the wind is there and when it's not there. Or maybe increase the ISO a little bit to get a little bit of a shorter shutter speed. But I am shooting at f16, and that is really my go-to aperture all the time. Because in landscape photography, the rule of thumb is that you want to have your entire photo in focus from front to back. So when you're shooting at f16, you have as small as an aperture as you can have, at least in all the lenses that I own, all the zoom lenses that I own. Whether it's my 12 to 24, my 16 to 35, which I'm shooting with now, 24 to 105, 70 to 200, 100 to 400. then f16 is for the most part the aperture that I can just go to where I know that I have everything in focus, but I'm not introducing diffraction. So f18, f20, f22, at least in most lenses where you go to f22. If you go beyond f22 in some zoom lenses, then you can sometimes go to f22. But for the most part, it's the 3 lowest apertures as a rule of thumb that I use. The rule of thumb I use. I don't use the apertures that you probably don't want to use due to diffraction. So f16, that is the reason it's my go-to aperture. And when you have this go-to aperture that you know is acceptably sharp and you have everything in focus, then you don't really need to think too much about depth of field. I'm just focusing for the most part about 1/3 into the scene, which is not really 1/3 into the scene, but if I want to have this foreground here with the heather and all the way up to the tree, then I'm probably going to focus around here somewhere on this top here. And in that way, I am about close to what's called hyperfocal distance. You can look it up. It's super boring, but it's a good thing to understand that when you work with depth of field, there is something called hyperfocal distance, where if you focus on that area, then everything which is supposedly 1/3 in front of that point and everything which is 2/3 behind it ought to be as much in focus as it can be. So yeah, layman's terms. But nevertheless, that is simply just how I go about it. It's how I focus when it comes to most landscapes, and that's the aperture I choose. And yeah, well, that's the reason. So now I've talked so much, I want to go and take some more photos in this beautiful, beautiful morning. And of course, I will walk you through it. So I've moved a little bit further. The tree I was photographing before was here, and I photographed it from over here. And now I've just come, like, I don't know, 40 meters further over. And I found this beautiful little scene here where heather, 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 and then up to this tree, and then I have some trees here in the background, which are being less and less contrasty as we go further into the background. And that is, again, why I really enjoy a foggy morning like this one, where there's just so much atmosphere and you can create a lot of depth in your photo. I'm trying not to be overly focused on depth in the sense that I really need to get like that 16mm, 12mm shot where the foreground is just jumping out in your face. Nevertheless, this particular composition here, I'm actually so close to the heather with the camera, as you can see right here. So even though I am actually photographing at f16, I am going to focus stack this one. So I make one photo where I'm focused on the tree, and then one photo where I'm just focusing on the immediate foreground heather here. So even though you do photograph at f16, it doesn't mean that you always have your photos in focus from front to back. Sometimes you are so close to a foreground that even though you're using that hyperfocal distance rule, you will still have to focus stack, at the very least, to get it utterly pin sharp in both the foreground and in the background. And since I have spent like about 20,000 Danish crowns on the 16 to 35mm GM lens, which is one of the sharpest lenses out there, then why not? So yeah, very simple, little bit of focus stacking, create some depth. And what I'm also thinking about in this particular composition here is that I'm going so far down that I'm actually making sure that these heather flowers here are just coming a little bit up over what is perceived to be the horizon, as you can see here. So they're just coming over there. and that is just to use that trick of like breaking the horizon. So yeah, I think it creates a little bit more dynamic in the scene, so the foreground is overlapping a little bit with the background without taking too much attention. It's something I talk about in my ebook on composition, Break the Horizon. It's one of the chapters. So if you want to learn a whole lot more about composition landscape photography, be sure to get those ebooks. You can get the 2 free light versions down in the description. Check those out first if you don't know whether you want the ebooks or not. But yeah, they have so many 5-star reviews, and I'm always, each day, so thankful to all of you who are getting my ebooks, because those are the ones that make sure that I can have a living where I do this, yeah, for a living. Yeah. So thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much. Link in the description. So I was actually composing a scene in this direction, and it is very beautiful, and I will work more on it. But then I just turned around and I saw this scene right here. This is actually the first tree I was photographing, and I put on my 28-200, and then I'm simply just zooming into it right here, just filling up the frame. It looks so cool, and especially when you have the fog and you have a little bit of details there in the background with the background trees. This may actually be, I'm not sure it's going to be the best shot of this morning, but it's definitely one of those, surprise, good one. Again, I'm shooting at f16, so I'm zoomed into about 150 millimeter, and it makes sure that I get the trunk and the leaves on the tree, like everything in focus that I need to have in focus, and then the immediate foreground grass right in the bottom of the frame is a little bit out of focus, but I don't really bother with that. So yeah, beautiful. So I think I forgot to mention before in regard to focus stacking that I keep it at f16. And the reason why I keep it at f16 is to also get as much overlap between my two photos as possible. If I shoot at like f8, I might have to take like 4 or 5 photos. So they're harder to stitch together, whereas if I'm shooting at f16, which is still as plenty sharp for me to get a sharp photo, then I will only need 2 photos, and that is exactly the case right here. So I have the heather here in the foreground. I put on my Tamron 28-200 millimeter, just as before. I think I've already mentioned that. Shooting at about 45 millimeter, and it is zoomed in so much that even though I am focusing on this silver birch here, the heather here in the foreground is out of focus. And I can't really focus on this grass here to get that hyperfocal distance effect. So I'm just getting one where the heather is super sharp and one where the tree is super sharp. And then I do have the overlay there where the grass is. So that ought to give me a completely sharp photo from front to back at f16. There are just so many compositions to pick out in this location. I think I've only walked like within 50 or so square meters in this video so far. And it's just so beautiful, these heath, moor-ish areas. Like, for you English people, what would you call an area like this? Let me know down in the description. So here in this composition, I'm using this patch of heather and this, and then these, and then I'm leading into the background with all these trees here in a horizontal composition where I am zooming in a little bit, as you can see here. Since I'm shooting just above 50mm, in this particular case, I will actually have to make a focus stack of three, also at f16. And here it starts to get a little bit annoying when it comes to the post-processing. So whether or not I'm actually going to focus stack at all, if I can do it or not, but there's simply so many overlapping grass, leaves and heather that it can be a little bit tricky to do that in Photoshop. But let's see how Photoshop will handle it, else there are other ways to do it. Focus stacking is of course also something I cover in my huge Photoshop for landscape photographers post-processing course. I show how to do it manually, I show it how to do it automatically, and then I show how you can do it if it's a little bit of a tricky scene and use some third-party plugins and programs to focus stack. So yeah, you can also check out Photoshop for landscape photographers down in the description, and there is of course a coupon code to save a little money. I cover so many other things in that course, like it's 19 hours of everything that I know from beginner to advanced, and I build it up progressively to make sure that all you beginners who are used to Lightroom or Camera Raw can easily transition into Photoshop and use that, because after all, Photoshop is still the king of post-processing by a landslide. So the sun is coming up, it's starting to burn through the fog, but there is still quite a lot of fog down here. As you can see, the sun is up here behind, and just for the sake of it, I have found a composition here where I'm photographing this really beautifully blooming patch of heather. It's really strong compared to many of the others. Using that as the foreground, leading up here to this tree where the sun is just behind it, and then we have all the fog there to separate it further from the background. But yeah, this is beautiful, so beautiful. 3 focus stacks, f16, and just focusing throughout the scene. And yeah, that's it. And here comes the sun and everything panics because everything happens at once. So this way, beautiful light. This way here, a fog bow. Of course, a fog bow, like, come on. And I have this beautiful tree right there, smack in the middle. Nothing much to think about here with the composition. Simply just F16, focus on the tree. Don't think about it, just get the shot. Kapow! And now I'm going to shoot in the other direction. So there are just so many gorgeous compositions popping out right now. I have just tried one of those I shot before. Seems to work really well with the light coming in. Right now I am photographing in this direction here, just cutting out something like this, including some of the foreground here. And yeah, this is it. Like, I will go around, photograph much more. I think you've understood how I think composition right now. Find some foreground and then focus stack if need be. F16, this is the reason why I shoot F16 almost all the time. At least it's my go-to aperture, simply just because I don't have to think too much about depth of field. I can focus my energy on just composing my scene and just finding focus, and that's about it. So yeah, if you want to learn more about composition in landscape photography, be sure to get my ebooks. If you want to learn how I edit my photos, not just focus stacking, so much more, also check out the links down in the description. And yeah, this is it for this morning. I will photograph a bit more, and if I get more photos, I will throw them up after this too. So thank you so much for watching.